On today's episode of the Voice of Creativity podcast, we meet with Dr. Luke Haverhals. We get to see how innovative one can be with plants. I hope you enjoy. Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Awesome to have you. I'm going to go on a limb and say you have probably the most unique background of any guest so far. Perhaps maybe the only U.S. Naval Academy guy on the podcast so far. I haven't asked everyone, but I'm fairly confident. But PhD chemist, stop me if I get any of these wrong, U.S. Naval Academy professor, lecturer, or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, professor. Assistant research professor.
Nice. Founder and CEO of Natural Fiber Welding, which I bet the audience is not familiar with yet, but they will be in a few minutes' time. And then, of course, I think they know a lot of your big brand investors that we can talk about as well, famous brands that we all know and love. So this is pretty cool. I think this is, at first glance, people might be like, how are we talking about creativity, innovation? The name welding's here. What's going on? But I think in a short order, they're going to be really blown away. So really excited to have you on.
It's great to be here, Brennan.
So to get started, I would say one of the things I love the most about your story and what I know of it so far is that you're using science to drive your creations, to create things.
Right.
And you're also tackling some of the most important problems that exist. Some of the scariest problems, one might say.
Yeah.
And so to set the stage, before we dive into those problems in detail, which I'd love to do, can we just do a little bit of background, like how you got here and what you were doing at the Naval Academy and stuff like that?
Yeah, so, okay. If you stop and think about the world we all live in today, we'll just say there's trillions of dollars of plastics that go into even more than that, trillions of dollars of products that we buy. And that many trillions of dollars of stuff is supported by even more, like tens, hundreds of trillions of dollars of infrastructure to make it possible. And that's all for actually a fairly small fraction of the world's population that gets to have closets full of stuff. Closets full of shoes, clothes, lots of couches and chairs and things in our homes, cars, automobiles, all this stuff. Okay, so we take it for granted that the world that we live in is the world we live in, and then we'll say we can go back 80 years and there wasn't hardly any plastics, at least in a meaningful business scale in the world, and so all this has really happened in not that long a time. And it turns out that, we can go into all the details why the world is the way it is, but basically, in a nutshell, humans have gotten very good at taking this fossil finite resource we know as petroleum and natural gas and things like that. We've gotten very good at making polymers, synthetic polymers, that you can mold and shape into complex composites that make shoes, cars, furniture, etc. But then there's an issue with that. So the issue is where these things then come from and where they go to. So there's issues with the finiteness of the resource. There's issues with the carbon footprint. We're on a pathway to have 1/6 of the world's carbon footprint is just making plastics. We don't really recycle plastics in this world today, despite what you might hear on the news. Generally speaking, we don't, because complex things like shoes, cars, etc., need to be unmixed if you want to recycle the individual plastic polymers. So, and then plastics are toxic, and they end up going in the environment when you wear your clothes, when you wash your clothes that's made of plastics. And there's something like 100 billion pounds of polyester that's used just for textiles each year. And so that's like 60%, almost 2/3 of the tonnage of all textiles end up being are plastic, polyester. And so when you wash your clothes, or even when you wear your clothes, you're breathing in microfiber, you're washing it down the drain. There's a whole bunch of negative, there's a bunch of science out there already that's saying the verdict is not good, that this stuff is neutral in the environment. In fact, it's detrimental. So in the meantime, more new plant matter grows in a day on Earth than the combined tonnage of all the plastic things that people make in years. And so when I was at the Naval Academy, the problem I was working on basically was, what if you could take the best of plastic, that is the molding and the shaping part, and apply it to natural materials that are abundant, lower cost. You can regrow them year after year, even regeneratively, right? And by the way, natural materials oftentimes have higher performance, just intrinsic performance, than synthetics. And so if we could solve this molding and shaping issue for natural materials, then potentially you can make higher performing things, lower cost, more abundant for more people. It all sums up to humans living better, more humans living better on planet Earth with less conflict over finite resources and arguing and having problems with the where things come from and where things go to problem of plastics. So that's the basic overview of the world is over dependent on plastic, and there's all these consequences. And in the meantime, the most available materials and the nicest, most circular materials, lowest carbon footprint materials, even potentially the highest performing materials are already invented, and they're all around us. And it's just a matter of coming up with the creative science, technology and manufacturing to deliver those materials into the format that your Ralph Lauren's, Allbirds, BMWs of the world, all of these are investors in NFW, what they need in order to deliver the products that we all, that some of us get to enjoy and love.
So that was amazing. Let me ask a few basic questions to make sure the audience is almost certainly there's maybe zero chemists probably listening, right? So let me just I'm going to ask some basic questions just to make sure everyone's following along before we jump ahead. So all of those things you talked about, polyester, plastics of all types, polymers, all of those things are petroleum based.
Generally speaking, yeah, there is such a thing as a category of bioplastics. And then I'll say the word bioplastic means many different things depending on what context that we're talking about. Generally speaking, when you look at your average consumer product today that is a physical thing, then there's plastics involved, and typically, let's just say overwhelmingly, those plastics are made from petroleum, natural gas, fossil resources.
Yeah. So a kind of connecting another basic concept here, making sure everyone's following along. That basically means, as you tipped off just there, people are digging for this. They're cracking holes in the earth open. They're destroying parts of the earth. They're using chemicals. They're putting a lot of heavy industry involved. They're probably putting stuff in the air while they're doing it. They're pulling this stuff out of the ground. And then, of course, the processing, however long that takes, and how much
pulling out of the ground. Yeah, believe it or not, pulling it out of the ground is the easy part, and we can talk about the amazing engineering really that goes into things like an oil rig out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. But most of the carbon footprint of plastics is not the carbon that's going to be in the plastic. It's the energy and things to drive the chemistry processes that take this thing, the stuff that we pulled out of the ground and do a whole bunch of chemistry on it and a bunch of different kinds of manufacturing steps to turn it into the thing that you want to buy, because no one wants to buy 55-gallon drums of crude oil.
Yeah. And okay. So just to kind of make sure everyone's following along with the picture, because I wasn't clear on this before I was doing your research before this. Not only is the plastic problem stuff ends up in the ocean and the Pacific garbage patch and in a turtle's nose and all that stuff that we're all kind of aware of thanks to but it's also the beginning. It's where it comes from, and it's the entire process throughout. And what you've just said, and kind of a tee up to what I believe you're going to tell us about next, is because there's so much, I guess, straight biomass being made among plants. It's not that petroleum is the only option for this. It's not that it's the most abundant option. It's certainly not the cleanest option, as we've just touched on. So what you're saying is, this is the way we've done it. It's only been done for about 80 years. In that time, we've managed to do a pretty significant job messing things up on the planet. And now it's kind of like momentum that's carrying us forward, right? It's like we have all this infrastructure, there's all this money being made.
That depend on it. That's right.
Got it. Okay. So what you're talking about is a new type of creation, basically, a whole new structure of creation, not like a new thing, but a new way, a new infrastructure of building stuff that is greener from the beginning to the end.
That's right. What I would say is Natural Fiber Welding, our company, represents literally an entirely new category to think about in terms of manufacturing. So we've made things from petrochemicals, and we could go back, you go back 80 years ago, you didn't have YouTube and the internet and a whole lot of research to tell those early polymer chemists what the consequences of what they were doing were, right? And what it would mean to do that at the scale of several billion people, and what it would mean that there was like more than that billion, like 5+ billion people that were left out of the economic equation. Okay, and now, but now we have fewer excuses, right? Or you just say there's more information now, thankfully, than ever before, and that information tells you if you think really carefully about solving a problem like this, it takes a creative solution where, yes, there's technology involved, but there's business involved, there's logistics involved, there's the understanding things about the population of planet Earth, and where, all of that has to be considered as you think about your recipe for a possible solution. So when I was doing that and founding Natural Fiber Welding, and even before founding Natural Fiber Welding, doing chemistry in the lab, a strong guiding principle for what we were trying to do and accomplish was really solving the problem in a holistic way that doesn't cause its own kind of problems down the road. So that means you don't also, it's great to use plants, but you don't use some, endangered Himalayan flower in order to get the job done, right? Yeah, we need abundant things.
Something we can have fields and fields
right.
of, and regenerate quickly. And
exactly, you need co-products, byproducts, waste products of growing our food. And fortunately, it's amazing that we'll say, and nature's already has these solutions out there. It's not, and we have technologies now that can handle natural inputs in automated ways. We have mechanical muscles. We don't need people doing all the work, thankfully. But what people get to do is focus on the creative part, right? The part we're talking about here, which is designing those systems not only so that they meet the needs of what consumers have come to know and expect, but that meet the needs of more consumers in the future. Because there's a whole bunch of reasons why other people who don't get to participate in the economy in the same way, the global economy in the same way, why they should. And then we'll say, and in a way then where you think very carefully about what are the mechanisms to support that on an ongoing basis in a way that doesn't, put a whole bunch of toxins on planet Earth, and where it's done regeneratively, not just, remember, we've got a bigger problem to solve than just like solving carbon footprint these days. We actually have to do things regeneratively. That is to say, to heal, because we've got these sins of the past. It's not just solving things on an ongoing basis. It's also making up for ground that we've lost in the last 80 years while we've been doing this thing without thinking about what the consequences were. So
healing in addition to improving ourselves.
That's right.
Not just improving ourselves. Yeah, no, it's a big task, and I think everyone's obviously aware of like the overall concept of the environmental situation we're in. But this is cool. So just to make sure we're following along, to make sure I'm following along, you've I think clearly outlined how petroleum is not the only channel, and that this channel that you've kind of outlined so far is a potentially better channel in basically every way, except that we'd have to put more infrastructure together, but that's not a problem necessarily. So the two main kind of macro questions I guess I'd have are you able to make things via this method that we'd recognize as clothes or tools or other things that we currently use petroleum and plastics for? And then two, the second macro question, I guess, maybe we can talk one at a time, but the second macro question would be like, okay, and then on the back end, we've created it in a more sustainable, healthier way. It theoretically, which we can talk about in a second, could be made into things that we would love to have and be able to use throughout our lives, just like plastic. Is there a similar, cleaner story on the back end too?
Yep. Yeah, great questions. So to answer that, I'm going to start going back to my youth a little bit to kind of like lay out the groundwork. So I grew up on a farm. And so my father, our family farm, is tied into this amazing production system that we kind of take for granted. People on the coast fly over it, or sometimes you might take an interstate through it. But there's an amazing productive system that already has existed on planet Earth for a long time. And people have been working on, we'll talk about, I can just quickly say, agriculture is certainly not perfect. It's not perfect. There's a whole bunch of, talk about sins of the past too, of how we've not done agriculture properly, but huge strides in terms of being able to grow things regeneratively in ways that build soil, don't destroy it, which means sinking carbon, not releasing it. And the fact that the earth is as big as it is, and as much sunlight hits the earth as it does, and as much rain falls as it does, means there's this huge productive capacity that the earth says. So, okay, I got one part of inspiration from, anyway, my father's idea of a great time. Some people go sit on a chair and look at the blue expanse of the ocean on a beach or something like that. My father looks off into the green fields of Iowa, and this time is an absolutely just beautiful time of year in places like Iowa and Illinois. And you see these waves of crops growing and doing photosynthesis. And then I'll take the other part of inspiration is the best chemist that I know is still my mother, because she knows how to cook. And so baking, I was never the best organic chemistry student, maybe, but if you think about what baking is, and cooking in general is a unified way to think about getting, you source wholesome ingredients, right? And you're going to mix and put those things together, and different recipes and different ingredients and different kinds of things. And then you can make, with a bunch of standard techniques, you can make souffle or birthday cake or bread or cracker, all kinds of different things. So when I was thinking about, okay, what is the scalable way to tap into this abundance and make a plethora of things that have to perform, then anyway, baking is actually the answer. Talk about some other time. Biotech might have a few niche solutions here and there, but generally speaking, genetically engineering everything and then hoping that mushrooms can grow things. I don't know, there are magic mushrooms or something, but they don't make magical things like purses appear, not in ways that perform. So when we talk about NFW, then to answer the first question, which is do things perform, then we spend a lot of time understanding from customers, so from people who make interiors of automobiles, furniture, footwear, clothing, etc. What are the performance metrics that materials have to maintain in order to do what they need to do for you? And then designing. So they have a concept.
Sorry.
Yeah. So there's all these metrics in the world about like how many Bailey flexes your footwear has to, your footwear materials have to undergo, and what kind of tensile strength and what kind of elongation and things that your fabrics need to have. And so first and foremost, the science and the technology of delivering that is what you have to do at first. But then in the case of NFW, I'll say there's many different technologies potentially that can deliver the performance. So, a fabric that is breathable and wicks moisture effectively. And okay, we were going to limit ourselves to using no petrochemicals. We're going to limit ourselves to using no plastics, no tox. So we said, okay, we have to stock a pantry with nothing but wholesome, all natural nutrient ingredients. That's like thing number one. And then I'll say the proof and the validation that we can do it is, well, you can look at a blog, for example, that BMW has recently put out that anyway talks about Mirum, for example, our leather-like material, and it ticks the boxes of performance that they need, which is to say it can be manufactured into complex parts. It doesn't fall apart. You can hit it with UV light, etc. It performs. And then the backside is, okay, but things have this where they go to issue as well. And so that's where if you start with all natural, wholesome ingredients and you don't break those things down, you don't try to fit them into the petrochemical model, you embrace what they are as a chemist point of view. I'm using very flowery language right now for a chemist, right? But the point is,
that's good.
You leave
keep it in our territory. I like it.
You leave the natural ingredients. There's a lot of people who, when they look at biomass, they say, how can I break this biomass down into simpler stuff so that I can fit it into the petrochemical model and production model
it's
and
like
system?
Turning corn to biofuel or ethanol, that kind of thing.
That's right. Or that's right. Or, chopping up sugars and dehydrating it and making furfurols and things like that. Basic chemistries that can go into the petrochemical model. And I'll say that is a way to do it, but then you're left with, you haven't solved this whole equation of where things go to, and you also haven't necessarily made the kind of economic, nor for that matter, carbon footprint progress that some people proclaim, because what you find out is you might be able to make some petrochemical input in a low carbon way, but the majority of the carbon footprint of plastics is not where the carbon came from, but the processing of the carbon system to get it to the form where you can use it. So that's the problem.
I think that's really insightful, because I bet people don't know that, because I think
they don't. Generally speaking, they don't. And that's right, and that's why you have companies out there making these broad proclamations about how they solve a problem. But the truth is, when you do the detailed accounting, it doesn't hold up. So we take the natural materials as they are, and then the concept really, another way to say what we do is less is more. If you don't break things down, if you know how to manufacture, and NFW has, I don't know, depending on how you count, between 7 and 11 different patent families that all are different ways of technologically achieving a kind of bakery, if you will, that takes these ingredients and different recipes and then makes these materials that perform, and then makes them at a cost point that is meaningful, that the market is used to buying. And then, because they're nutrients, because the materials are still nutrients, trees are really complex, right? There's lots of different kinds of things in a tree, and yet a tree falls in the forest and different parts of the tree degrade on completely different timescales, but the tree itself is nutrients for the next cycle. And so if you make your materials that way, then your materials have those properties as well. So it means you don't have to suffer the toxic consequences that, again, when you make synthetic things and you're not thinking ahead in this way, then you make these concessions for what you're doing and what you're doing it with. It ends up not fitting into this natural world that we live in. And so,
you can imagine.
We actually, it's the two birds with one stone, so to speak, or there's maybe my children and me too, bird lovers. So I shouldn't say such a phrase, right? Two birds with one stone, but we'll say many things at the same time get solved with this concept of, if you can fit yourself and keep yourself within the circle of life, so to speak, then you don't have the where it comes from problem and the where it goes to problem. You let nature, which has already solved these things, be the hero, so to speak.
Yeah, if you don't use dark magic to make it, you don't need to use dark magic to unmake it, basically.
That's right. And that's the problem too, is dark magic costs money. So when you create these Frankenstein sort of systems, production systems, and now the Franken system needs an intervention, and now the intervention needs an intervention, and the intervention needs another intervention to intervene for the. It's a cascading set of failures that never really resolves itself. So the humans for a long time, we got our resources directly from nature, and then I'll say, and we've done in different ways, but it becomes imperative when you start putting 7.5 and growing billion people on the planet, and then you get to a situation where a few billion of us live really well, and then there's 5+ billion people who don't live nearly monetarily, and when you consider how many couches and shoes and things that other people get to have, then they don't. Anyway, they're human beings, and to some extent, stuff shouldn't define us. But on the other hand, we all know we like our stuff, and so if you want to have people live with that different quality and standard of living and have that optionality, then you have to think very, very carefully about how you're going to deliver that if you're going to do it in a way that's ongoing sustainable.
This is cool. It sounds exactly, or not exactly like, but very akin to like a Tesla, the story behind Tesla, right? You're saying it's not that you're not saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not saying it's not that your system could not coexist with the existing system. It's just that to build for as many people as we have and we're going to have, and to address the problems that arise from the extraction, the processing, and the getting rid of those things, we need to design the system in such a way that it takes all of that into account. Otherwise, as we've seen, the current system is already causing problems that just 20, 30, 40% of the population really taking advantage of it. So there's no way that the current system by itself could support everyone without serious environmental damage.
Yeah, I mean,
So
and you
it
can
sounds
see
like-
it, right? I mean, you can see it. There's very clearly, you can go to Mount Maloa in Hawaii and you can measure carbon in the atmosphere. And what I tell people is, look, you go back to 1960, there's measurements that tell you what the parts per million in the atmosphere were, and now they've been measuring every year, and it goes up around 2 parts per million per year. And then you look at from 1960 today, you look at the number, what it was back then, or maybe even a little bit before that, and you look at what it was now, and you notice the number's different, but it's not just different. It's from a ratio perspective, it's a lot different. So I'll just say, it has an effect. Like if you can measure that kind of thing in Hawaii, which is a long way from where the continents are, then okay. We can talk about the effects, and some people want to argue that, well, there's no bad effects. Well, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of evidence that says otherwise. And so the system, I'll say, the system can't support itself so well. Or here's another thing. Maybe I was a better science student than historian or something, but I'll say one of the things that I noticed studying history was that generally speaking, when people are in conflict, it's over finiteness of resources. So we exist in a world where if you wanted to pull as much petroleum out of the ground as is required to actually let everyone on planet Earth live like your average American, or even lesser than that, you end up running out of petroleum products at unit economics that are meaningful. You end up running into really, really hard problems of limits of your economy, let alone the fact of how much CapEx and OpEx it takes to create a petroleum industry as large as it is today, just to take care of the few of us who get to live well with it. So whether you think about the human toll, the environmental toll, I'll just say there's consequences and the writing's on the wall. And then humans, let's hope that we're a little bit smarter than, there's bacteria in petri dishes. And when you see the doubling effect and you see how quickly cells are reproducing, and you see the agar, how much, how big the circumference of the little petri dish is, you can do the calculation and say, in 16 hours or whatever, it's game over because they're out of resources. Well, let's hope people are a little smarter, even if some want to argue that, there's no consequences to some of these other where it goes to problems or where it comes from problems. Well, there's a really, really big other problem in this world, which is that there's other deserving people on this planet that would love, love, love to be participants in this economy. And we should come up with a smarter, more creative solution than we have.
Yeah, I love that. And the cool thing about this is, on Space, you say, you're just going to have a chemist on, right? And you say, why would you have a chemist on like a creativity and innovation podcast? But actually, it's exactly what you're doing. You're looking at a problem as you've been focused on. In fact, it's like several of the biggest problems that we have, equality and the environment and all this stuff you just talked about. And you're kind of just looking at the available, we've got various numbers of paints we could choose from. What can we do with these paints to paint the picture we really want, which is right. Everyone with the same opportunities, everyone with the same availability of stuff and comfort, and obviously not destroying the petri dish or using all the resources in the petri dish before we get there, or before our kids get there. So that's cool. You're kind of it sounds like you took like a totally whiteboard blank slate approach and said, okay, what's available, and arrived at biomass. And it's not that you're just a random guy. You're a chemist who can figure this out.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, to me, it is a completely creative enterprise in the sense that, my medium is different. It's business
Right.
and technology or something. And my context and my constraints are different, right? When you're painting a picture, you've got the color palette you've got the canvas you've got, and then you're thinking about what idea you want to get across to the audience of people who are going to observe this, and who do I want to speak to when I create this thing? Well, my constraints, NFW's constraints, are different. It's like we have unit economics that will dictate whether or not you can afford, Brennan, to own what we produce and what we and
That's right.
and then there are performance constraints on whether or not BMW can take what we produce and put it in a car. Okay, so the constraints are different, but the creative enterprises of really like looking at your constraints, thinking about your audience or the outcome, the output, the statement you need to make. The variables are very different, but the enterprise and the what the human brain needs to do, I would say, in many ways are similar.
Yeah, you're doing the exact same thing, actually. It's funny. Yeah, I was a music major, so not a chemist, and I run a company that deals with people creating visuals and uses machine learning and software to enable them to create visuals better. And so it's like even though that sounds quite different, it's actually you're doing the exact same thing we're doing, just a totally different approach, different medium, as you described. So I think what would be helpful is, if I understand correctly, you have some physical examples of the at least the materials that you could be sharing. Is that right?
Absolutely. Let me show you some things. So here's a leather-like material. We call it Nirum. And we'll just say, today people don't recognize that, leather, the hide comes from a cow, but there's a whole bunch of petrochemicals invested in turning a hide into leather. And then there's a whole bunch of people in this world that take petrochemicals and make synthetic leather. Some people call it vegan. I'll say I have a problem with people calling plastic things vegan, because when you look at where plastics come from and where they go to, it ends up not being so nice to animals.
Right. Not very light on animals. I agree.
That's right. But anyway, this material is a material that performs, and anyway, you can make things like, here's my wallet. So wallets and bags, and let's see. We've got, there's footwear. So when we say Natural Fiber Welding has Allbirds as a partner investor, okay, think about what you have to do to get a company like that to understand how good these materials work, so that they'll not only just be customers, but then they want to invest because they see that this is the future. So that's
awesome. So can you? I don't know how detailed you can be and how much you want to share, but is it possible to kind of talk through the pieces of the shoe that are made?
Yeah.
And like what even perhaps, I don't know. Again, I don't want you to overshare, your secret technologies, but like if we can have a concept of what plants might even go into, the sole of a shoe or whatever the piece, that might, I think, help people understand like how truly different this whole process is.
Yeah. So, and I won't go into all the details, mainly for time and like to just not wrecking people's day about chemistry. But I'll say, when you look at something like modern footwear, so this is NFW's, materials, but you have to consider, for instance, that the upper needs to be flexible, and you're going to have to flex this shoe a lot, right? Hundreds of thousands of times. And what you don't want is in certain spots of the footwear for cracks and things. Then you have to think about, and the bottom of the shoe is, it's got to be durable, and depending on what kind of shoe it is, the inside needs to have rebound, right? If you're running, you'd prefer not to give up all your energy to heating up the environment in your shoes. You'd prefer to get some of that energy back with each spring in your step, so that you can keep running. And so all those different, if you think about foams and bottoms of shoes, the sole of the shoe or the tread, you think about the upper material, even like the upper material too, like what you need to do for the for the eyelets for shoelaces and how the material needs to be stiff is different than maybe how the material you might want it to flex so that you can slip your foot in more easily. And so
Right.
what
So
you've
there's all
got
these
here is
different
a
pieces.
complex composite. All right, and
Yeah.
today people make comparable things, or most things you go to the store and you buy. There's different kinds of plastics that have been developed to make that, and then the problem is when you make the complete product, the product itself can't be unmixed, and therefore you don't see any substantial recycling of shoes. You see shoes go to landfill. You see shoes go to incineration. That's it. So with NFW, when I was mentioning earlier patent families, we actually developed chemistries with materials like cotton, and when I say cotton, I mean, virgin cotton, but waste cotton that people want to get rid of, or that's your old t-shirt. Hemp, waste cork powder. There's all kinds of people who grow this. Well, there's trees that grow that you harvest the bark every so often, and then the bark goes into wine bottle stoppers and flooring. But there's a lot of waste, and that waste gets ground up, and people wonder what to do with that waste. Well, maybe you make one of those boards you put pins in or something like that, or maybe NFW goes and makes an even higher value thing, which is leather-like material. So when I say there's fibers, there's sawdust, and cork is kind of an example of you could think of it as almost like a kind of sawdust. And then there's other kinds of, people also saw up wood and make furniture. So you've got waste there. You've got crop oils of various sorts. The biofuels industry, today we still burn most of the heat that humans generate to drive processes and power our cars is not bio-derived. But we can note that there's a whole bunch of that energy that is basically a different kind of recycling of carbon, which is sequestration of carbon from photosynthesis of plants, and then either through crop oils or fermentation, making ethanol, things like that. People make a fuel that has a nominally smaller carbon footprint than just putting new fossil carbon into the atmosphere from digging it up from the ground. Okay, so that industry is pretty well formed. And if you think about how much fuel that you burn in an average year versus if you could take a small amount of that fuel and just turn it directly into this. So different, again, crop oils that exist. What I'm describing to you now is, and I could also mention like natural rubber, which is a sap of a tree, or you can get natural rubber, it turns out, from a whole bunch of sources. These are all materials that are produced in abundance, that are low cost. Today, NFW works with the commodity stuff that just exists, and then we're working also on things where you can get these ingredients in ways that provably help sink carbon in the soil. And so not just in the material itself. And so that's our pantry. That's our flour and our eggs and our sugar and our milk is those things: lignocellulose, crop oils, natural elastomers, etc. And then what we do is we create the recipes, and the recipes are created to do the different parts that you need to do. And so it's not good. That's another point that makes NFW different than, like, for example, the biotech side of things. Biotech people focus a whole bunch on genetically modifying this little critter to do this one thing and maybe make this molecule, but that doesn't actually manufacture anything. It just makes a different kind of an input maybe than the petrochemical industry. It doesn't actually, you have to do a whole bunch more work now to turn that into a product. Or if you want to do what's called biofabrication and grow something new, well, maybe you can grow something new, but it, generally speaking, takes a long time, can't compete with the molding and the shaping efficiency and speed that the plastics industry has, and then ends up getting you something that doesn't perform. So this is a different category and approach, and it's really all around, listening very carefully to what industries need, delivering that performance in a profoundly different way, in a new creative way, and then doing it in a way that it's one thing to do the performance, and it's another thing to do the performance and be able to address the cost points that these mature industries have to be able to receive the materials, because you can have the best technology in the world, and if no one can afford it, well, anyway, you got a museum curiosity, I suppose, but you need to be able to scale it.
So, of course, I think everyone hearing this has to love the story, right? So, one question I think everyone would have is, you just held up a shoe, like a completed shoe that it looks like I could buy.
Yep.
So where are we? Like, are there products in the market today? Like, I think, did I not hear that the Olympics are using some textiles like this? Or like, is this actually in market now, or where are we kind of on the curve of making this a reality?
Yep. So 6 years ago, I founded a company, and based on a really deep insight of there were tens of millions of dollars of research that I got to be part of. As a professor at the Naval Academy, working with Paul Truelove and Hugh DeLong and a whole bunch of other brilliant people. So, bunch of let's say lab scale sort of ideas, and then when you start a company, we didn't have to start over with basic research. There were some particular ideas that I had done unit economic analysis of and thought about talked to some industry people and started scaling that. So we can fast forward a little bit. The first 4 years of the company's existence was all about making sure that we had not just a solution, but an ecosystem approach. Like if you're going to pay off this big vision, it's not good enough just to have like a textile offering. You need a leather-like material. You need the whole like thing. So and moreover, if you start selling that right away at the start, maybe you'll convince someone you're on the right track. But the problem is, you might undercut your business legs, because there's a whole bunch of you can imagine there's a lot of intellectual property behind what we do. And it takes some time to really make sure that you take what you can do at a lab and convert it into a setting where it can be mass produced at the right cost points with the right performance characteristics for industries to be able to take as input. So NFW is right at this inflection point right now, where the baking, we'll continue to develop recipes and things like that, but there's a whole bunch of basic intellectual property that is very well formed in these different parts of the ecosystem that now enables us to interface with Ralph Lauren, interface with BMW, Allbirds, et cetera. And I'll say dozens, hundreds actually of other brands that also, those three that I mentioned had the foresight to invest. There are a whole bunch of people and entities that, anyway, their model maybe isn't to invest so much, but is to take a great product when it's available. So we've been working on the fundamentals. Then we have been doing a lot of trials and prototyping, making these shoes. I didn't hold up the first shoe we ever made, right? We've been making many shoes of different kinds of constructions, making sure that's all well understood, making sure the intellectual properties well taken care of. And now we're just at this inflection point where we're ready to scale, because we've got cost point and performance, and our recipes have been optimized to where we know with this first generation of materials that go out that they have the right sustainability metrics and marks and things that you need to have in a world if you're going to pay off the vision. And so factories are being built when we're raising funding to expand those factories dramatically, so that you can see in 22, 23 this hockey stick worth of materials going into the world. And I'll say, and so there's materials right now that are leaving NFW, going to other people's factories, getting churned into the product that shows up on store shelves later this year, and then really aggressively ramps in 22 and beyond. And then
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that's where we're at. We're literally at the inflection point.
The exciting spot. Okay, cool. Because as you can imagine, as a consumer, someone wearing leather right now, wearing jeans down here, presumably made of cotton, but I don't know. I haven't checked.
Yeah. I'll say, and that's the remarkable thing. You won't see NFW in just one product where we only talk about that one product forever, and it's very limited. We're talking about launches that are substantial launches where big, huge volume kinds of things that play out through time, very nimble, athletic, you might say, brands that can turn things quickly, that can go direct to consumer. It's the whole gamut. And so it will be we have this internal phrase in the company of rolling thunder. It's like anyway, some people make their big pronouncements, and that's all well and good, but marketing can only take you so far. When you literally start changing other people's business, that's when you can make the sustainability progress that the world needs to see.
So as a consumer, so anyone listening to this, in the future, we're in the second half of 2021. So what you were talking about as a consumer is very exciting to hear, because you're effectively saying we are months or perhaps a year or two away from me being able to buy something perhaps that is made by you guys and completely made to the side of that petroleum monster we've talked about. Completely, from cradle to grave, so to speak, is a much better process, both sustainably for everyone as well as, in terms of destroying the environment.
That's right. There's a new systematic way to think about cradle to cradle, and where there's not toxicity spewing out as you do your circles. So that's anyway. I'm very proud and grateful to be on a team. It's also, we could say, here in July of 2021, we also have there's more than 130 people that are in this company working on all various aspects of this. We'll be double that size in, I don't know, by the end of the year, kind of a thing. Maybe not quite double, but anyway, it's growing very rapidly, put it that way. And where it's growing rapidly, because there are now these repeatable production systems that are turning on. And when you have repeatable production systems turning on, then the nice thing is you can train this group of people to start doing this and this people to start doing that. And then those groups train more people, and the layers of the onion grow.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I have a distinct sense that a lot more than 100 and change people are going to be working on this very soon. This is very
well, and we can also mention that all the brand partners that we work with. So they have their own team. So NFW interfaced with fashion brands and with automotive brands, and it's not. I'll say we have our part, which is deliver the right thing at the right price point, with the right performance, with the right sustainability, et cetera. And then we don't make the car. Like you could talk about how there's commercials that used to air. I'll start dating myself if I say this, but we don't make the shirt you buy. We make it bluer, or we don't. So there are those kinds of adages. In some cases, NFW perhaps will make some things that you can get directly from NFW someday. We'll see. But when you have a technology like this, you can imagine also what happens when you start to really extend it out and think what kind of products can NFW just brand and start scaling, because I don't know, there's interesting synergies when you think about cradle to cradle and how things get back to you, so that you can use that as a resource to make the next generation, right?
So like the Apple model, where I want your phone back and I'll pay you to take your phone back so I can use the rare earth minerals in my next phone, that kind of model. Oh, that's awesome.
That's right.
Dude, this is really cool. So I think everyone's going to love this. Is like probably the most unexpected creation and innovation and creativity story. You are disrupting at least the fashion industry and perhaps cars and other ones via chemistry and plants, which I don't think anyone saw coming. And that's awesome. And so awesome to have you on here. Open invitation whenever you can talk about it, whenever something launches.
Yeah.
Via one of your partners or otherwise, you can come back on and you can tell us about it. I'm sure everyone will want to check it out. This is really cool. And thank you for your time, man. It's been really awesome chatting today.
Brennan, thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
So if you enjoyed that podcast, if you like creativity and topics like that, or if you work in a creative field, you'll definitely love the IAA, the International Advertising Association. You should check them out at iaaglobal.org. The IAA is one of the oldest running since 1938 associations for creative professionals, and it's currently acting as the global compass, sharing information like this, gathering cool minds like you've just seen to chat and to understand exactly what's happening today. So I encourage you to go check them out, iaaglobal.org.